Think you can handle the dark? Tonight, we're stepping into a Texas tuck shop after hours, a place where the strange is just another co-worker. Prepare for a night of unexplained noises, moving objects, and rules so bizarre, they'll make your head spin. Will you make it through the night without looking over your shoulder? The highway stretched before me like a black ribbon cutting through the Texas desert, the last amber rays of sunset dissolving into purple twilight. My headlights were the only illumination for miles, bouncing off the occasional road sign and the scattered tumbleweeds that rolled across the asphalt like ghostly wanderers. I'd driven this route for 40 minutes from El Paso, each mile taking me further from civilization, further from the comforting hum of city life, and closer to my new workplace, a place I'd only seen in a grainy photograph during my brief phone interview. The stop-and-go tuck shop materialized from the darkness like a lighthouse in a sea of nothing. A single fluorescent sign buzzed and flickered above the building, casting a sickly green glow across the gravel parking lot. The structure itself was a relic from another era, a squat, concrete building with narrow windows that reminded me of suspicious eyes watching. The paint had long since faded from white to a dingy gray, and the metal awning over the entrance groaned in the desert wind, creating a rhythmic creaking that immediately set my nerves on edge. I parked my beat-up Honda next to the only other vehicle in the lot, a dusty pickup truck that looked like it hadn't moved in weeks. Killing the engine, I sat for a moment in the sudden silence, broken only by that persistent creaking of metal and the distant howl of wind across the empty plains. This was it, my new job. Night shift cashier at a tuck shop in the middle of nowhere, serving the occasional trucker and night traveler who needed gas, snacks, or a bathroom break during their lonely journey across Texas. The money was surprisingly good for such simple work, almost suspiciously good, but I've been desperate enough not to ask too many questions. Student loans don't pay themselves, and my previous job at a coffee shop in El Paso had barely covered rent. When I'd seen the posting online, promising $18 an hour plus overnight differential, I'd applied immediately. The interview had been strange, conducted entirely over the phone by someone who called himself Raymond, but never provided a last name. His voice had been gravelly, like he'd spent years smoking unfiltered cigarettes, and he'd asked only two questions. Can you work alone? And can you follow instructions exactly as given? When I'd answered yes to both, he told me I was hired and to show up tonight at 8. Checking my phone, I saw it was 7:55. No signal, of course. I'd lost bars about 20 miles back. I grabbed my backpack from the passenger seat and stepped out into the cooling desert air. The temperature had dropped dramatically with the sun, and I pulled my jacket tighter as I approached the entrance. Above the door, in addition to the main sign, hung a hand-painted wooden plaque that read, "St. 1952, open 24 hours, serving night travelers." The paint was chipped and faded, but something about those words, night travelers, sent an inexplicable chill down my spine. The door chimed as I entered, a cheerful jingle that seemed absurdly out of place in the oppressive atmosphere. Inside, the shop was exactly what you'd expect from a highway convenience store. 5 narrow aisles packed with chips, candy, and canned goods. A refrigerated section along the back wall with sodas and beer. A coffee station that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Reagan administration. And a front counter with an ancient cash register that probably predated computers. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed constantly, and several flickered in a rhythm that made my eyes hurt. Behind the counter stood a man who matched the voice I'd heard on the phone. Late 60s, weathered skin, sharp eyes beneath bushy gray eyebrows, and yes, the unmistakable look of a lifelong smoker. He wore a faded denim shirt with a name tag that simply read Ray. He didn't smile when he saw me, just gave a curt nod and gestured for me to come closer. "You're Derek, I take it," he said, though it wasn't really a question. "Right on time. That's good. Being on time matters here. More than you might think." "Yes, sir," I replied, setting my backpack down beside the counter. Ready to start. Ray studied me for a long moment, his eyes moving from my face down to my shoes and back up again, as if assessing whether I was suitable for some purpose I didn't understand. Finally, he reached beneath the counter and pulled out a laminated sheet of paper and a key ring with 3 keys. "This is yours now," he said, sliding both items across the counter. "The keys are for the front door, the storage room and back, and the bathroom. Don't lose them. Don't make copies. Don't let anyone else touch them." He tapped the laminated sheet. "And this is your Bible. The rules. Read them. Memorize them. Follow them exactly." I picked up the sheet and began to scan the list. There were 12 rules, typed in an old-fashioned font that suggested they'd been created decades ago, and simply photocopied over and over. Some were normal. Count the registered start and end of shift. ID anyone buying tobacco or alcohol. Clean spills immediately. But others were odd. Rule number 7 caught my attention first. If you hear knocking from the storage room after midnight, do not respond. Do not open the door. Continue your normal duties. I started, looking up at Ray. "What is this?" "The rules are the rules," Ray interrupted sharply. "I don't explain them. I don't justify them. I don't discuss them. You follow them. You'll be fine. You'll have a steady job, good money, and nothing to worry about. You don't follow them." He trailed off, but his expression said everything his words didn't. "Okay," I said slowly. "Follow the rules." "Got it." Ray pulled out a cigarette and lighter, clearly preparing to leave. "Your shift is 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. Clock is on the wall. Register has 200 in the till to start. Coffee machine stays on all night. If anyone wants coffee, let them pour it themselves. Don't touch it after 11. Pumps outside are pay-at pump only after dark, so you don't have to worry about that." Questions? About 1,000, I thought, but I just shook my head. "I think I'm good." "Remember, Derek," Ray said, moving toward the door. "The rules exist for a reason. Every single one. Don't be creative. Don't be brave. Don't be curious. Just be careful." He paused at the threshold, looking back at me one last time. Previous night's shift guy lasted 3 months. Before that, for weeks. Before that, one night. He let that information hang in the air like a threat. "Hope you've got more sense than they did." And then he was gone, the door chiming merrily behind him, leaving me alone in the humming, flickering fluorescent silence of the stop-and-go tuck shop. I stood behind the counter for several minutes, listening to the building settle around me. The refrigerators along the back wall hummed their monotonous song. The lights buzzed overhead. The awning outside continued its rhythmic creaking. But beneath those sounds, I began to notice others. The settling of old wood, the whisper of air through unseen gaps, and something else, something I couldn't quite identify. A presence, maybe, a weight to the air that hadn't been there when Ray was present. Shaking off the unease, I decided to occupy myself by reading through the rules more carefully. I pulled up the stool behind the counter and spread the laminated sheet under the light. Stop-and-go tuck shop. Night shift regulations. 1. Always count the register at the start and end of your shift. If the amount doesn't match, count again. If it still doesn't match, leave it. Do not investigate. 2. Check identification for anyone purchasing restricted items. If someone appears who clearly doesn't need to show ID but insists on showing you one, accept it but don't look at it directly. Scan it quickly and return it. 3. The security camera monitor is located under the counter. Check it every 30 minutes. If you see yourself on the camera when you know you're standing somewhere else, turn the monitor off for 10 minutes. 4. Aisle 3 contains the candy and snack section. If you notice a shadow in aisle 3 that doesn't belong to any product or person, don't look at it directly. Continue your work. It will move on. 5. Clean spills immediately. If you find a spill that appears to be blood, use the special cleaning solution in the red bottle under the sink. Do not use regular cleaner. Do not call emergency services. 6. The phone behind the counter will sometimes ring. Answer it professionally. If there's only breathing on the other end, hang up after 10 seconds. If someone asks for Raymond, say he's unavailable and hang up. If someone asks what year it is, tell them, and then immediately unplug the phone for 1 hour. 7. If you hear knocking from the storage room after midnight, do not respond. Do not open the door. Continue your normal duties. 8. A bell above the door announces customers. It should only ring when someone enters or exits. If it rings when no one is moving through the doorway, say, "Welcome to Stop and Go," and continue working. Do not look at the door. 9. Do not touch the coffee machine after 11 p.m. If it turns on by itself, let it brew. If it overflows, let it overflow. Clean up the mess in the morning. 10. If a customer asks for directions to Highway 67, tell them to continue straight for 10 miles. Do not tell them there is no Highway 67. Do not tell them they're on Highway 90. 11. The bathroom key should only be given to customers who ask for it. If the key returns warm to the touch, wait 15 minutes before giving it to another customer. If it returns cold as ice, clean the bathroom immediately, regardless of the time. 12. Your shift ends at 6 a.m. sharp. If dawn hasn't broken by 6:15 a.m., remain inside with the door locked until you see sunlight. Do not attempt to leave in darkness after your shift ends. I read through the list 3 times, my unease growing with each pass. These weren't normal employee guidelines. These were rules designed to navigate something abnormal, something wrong. The specificity of them suggested they'd been crafted through experience. Bitter experience, probably. How many night shift workers before me had learned these rules the hard way? My first customer arrived at 9:30. A tired-looking trucker who bought cigarettes, beef jerky, and 3 energy drinks. Normal. Blessedly normal. He grunted a thank you and left, his big rig rumbling back to life in the parking lot before disappearing down the highway. After he left, the silence returned, heavier than before. At 10:15, I heard it for the first time. A scraping sound like something being dragged across the floor, coming from somewhere near the back of the shop. I froze, listening. The sound came again, definitely from aisle 3. My heart rate picked up. I thought about Rule 4 and the shadow I was supposed to ignore. Was this connected? I forced myself to continue organizing lottery tickets behind the counter, keeping my eyes down, focusing on the task. The scraping sound continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped as suddenly as it had started. Don't look, I told myself. Just follow the rules. At 11 p.m. exactly, the coffee machine behind me gurgled to life. I jumped, spinning around to see fresh coffee beginning to brew, steam rising from the pot. I hadn't touched it. No one had touched it. It had simply turned on by itself. Rule 9 echoed in my mind. Do not touch the coffee machine after 11 p.m. If it turns on by itself, let it brew. So I let it brew. I watched as the pot filled with dark liquid, the smell of cheap coffee filling the shop. When it finished, the machine fell silent again, the pot sitting there, full and steaming. Waiting. But for what? For whom? This was going to be a very long night. The clock on the wall read 11:45 when I experienced my first real test of the rules. I was restocking cigarettes behind the counter, trying to keep busy, trying not to think about the shadow in aisle 3 or the self-brewing coffee or the growing certainty that something was fundamentally wrong with this place. That's when the phone rang. The sound pierced the silence like a knife, making me drop the carton of Marlboros I'd been holding. My hand shook slightly as I reached for the old rotary phone mounted on the wall beside the register. Rule 6. Answer professionally. I took a breath and lifted the receiver. Stop and Go Tuck Shop. How can I help you? My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Breathing. Just breathing on the other end. Not heavy or threatening, but deliberate. Someone was there, listening, waiting. I could hear the faint crackle of the connection, could sense a presence on the other end of that line. My eyes found Rule 6 on a laminated sheet. Hang up after 10 seconds. I counted in my head. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. The breathing continued, steady and patient. 5 Mississippi. 6 Mississippi. My palm was sweating against the receiver. 9 Mississippi. 10 Mississippi. I hung up. The silence that followed felt oppressive, like the air pressure in the shop had suddenly increased. I realized I'd been holding my breath and forced myself to inhale slowly. Just follow the rules. That's all I had to do. Whatever this place was, whatever was happening here, the rules would keep me safe. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. At midnight, I checked the security monitor for the third time that hour. The small screen under the counter showed grainy black and white footage cycling through 4 different camera views. The parking lot, the interior looking down the aisles, the storage room door, and the area behind the counter where I stood. Everything looked normal. I watched as the views cycled, once, twice, and then I froze. On the view showing the interior aisles, I could see myself behind the counter, exactly where I was standing. But in the image, I was looking down at something in my hands. In reality, I was staring directly at the monitor. I watched my screen cell for several seconds, seeing myself move, seeing myself do things I wasn't actually doing. Rule 3 crashed through my mind. If you see yourself when you know you're standing somewhere else, turn the monitor off for 10 minutes. My finger found the power button and pressed it. The screen went black. My heart was hammering now, that fight-or-flight response kicking in hard. What the hell was happening? How could the camera show me doing things I wasn't doing? Was it a recording? A glitch? Or something else entirely? Something that didn't have a rational explanation? I forced myself to move, to do something normal. I grabbed a broom from the small closet beside the bathroom and began sweeping the floor, starting at the front of the shop and working my way back. The familiar motion helped calm my nerves. Sweep, sweep, sweep. Just a normal night shift worker doing normal night shift things. Nothing to worry about. Nothing at all. As I swept near aisle 3, I felt it before I saw it. A coldness, like standing in front of an open freezer. The temperature dropped at least 10 degrees in the span of 2 steps. My breath suddenly visible in small clouds. I stopped, broom in hand, and very carefully did not look directly down the aisle. But in my peripheral vision, I could see it. A shadow, dark and dense, darker than any shadow should be, standing between the shelves of chips and candy. It wasn't moving, wasn't doing anything threatening. It was just there, existing, watching, maybe, though it had no discernible features, no eyes or face. Just a human-shaped absence of light, somehow more solid and real than the product surrounding it. Rule 4. Don't look at it directly. Continue your work. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee, to get the hell out of this nightmare. But I needed this job. I needed the money. And some part of me, some stubborn part, wanted to prove I could handle this. I resumed sweeping, moving past aisle 3 without turning my head, without acknowledging what I'd seen. Behind me, I heard that scraping sound again, the sound of something being dragged across the linoleum floor. I didn't look back. I just kept sweeping. When I reached the back of the shop, near the storage room door, the sound stopped. I allowed myself a glance over my shoulder. Aisle 3 looked normal now. No shadow, no cold spot, just candy bars and potato chips under flickering fluorescent lights. But the temperature hadn't returned to normal. The shop still felt cold, as if something had permanently altered the atmosphere. At 12:30 a.m., 3 sharp knocks echoed from the storage room door. I was back behind the counter by then, tried to appear busy with inventory sheets I barely understood. The knocks were loud, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Knock, knock, knock. A pause, then again. Knock, knock, knock. They sounded exactly like someone wanting to be let out, like someone trapped inside, needing help. Rule 7 burned in my brain. If you hear knocking from the storage room after midnight, do not respond. Do not open the door. Continue your normal duties. But what if someone was actually in there? What if another employee had gotten locked in, or a customer? No, the rules were clear. They'd been written for a reason. Ray's parting words echoed back to me. Don't be creative. Don't be brave. Don't be curious. Just be careful. I focused on the inventory sheets, my pen scratching numbers I wasn't really reading. The knocking continued for 5 minutes, then stopped as abruptly as it had started. In the silence that followed, I could swear I heard footsteps inside the storage room. Heavy footsteps walking away from the door, walking deeper into what should have been a small supply closet. A car pulled into the parking lot at 1 a.m., headlights sweeping across the shop windows. Relief flooded through me. Another customer. Human interaction. Normal reality, even if just for a moment. I watched through the window as a woman in her 40s climbed out of a sedan, stretching after a long drive. She walked toward the entrance with the purposeful stride of someone who'd been on the road too long and needed coffee and a bathroom break. The bell above the door chimed as she entered. "Evening," she said with a tired smile. "Long drive. Mind if I grab some coffee?" "Help yourself," I replied, trying to sound casual, trying to pretend this was just a normal convenience store. "Bathroom keys here if you need it." She headed for the coffee station, and I watched her pour a cup from the pot that had brewed itself hours ago. She took a sip, seemed satisfied, then brought the cup to the counter along with a package of donuts and a bottle of water. As I rang her up, she glanced around the shop. "Quiet place," she observed. "You work here alone all night?" "Yeah," I said, handing her the change. "Just started today, actually." Something shifted in her expression. Concern, maybe, or pity. "Be careful," she said quietly. "This stretch of highway, it's got a reputation. Things happen here that don't happen other places. People see things." She paused, seemed to be deciding whether to continue. "My brother worked night shift at a gas station about 20 miles up the road. He lasted 2 weeks before he quit. Wouldn't tell us why, but he won't drive this highway anymore. Not after dark." Before I could respond, she headed for the bathroom, taking the key I offered. I watched her disappear down the short hallway, then turned my attention back to the security monitor, which I turned back on 10 minutes earlier. The cycling view showed an empty shop, empty parking lot, the storage room door firmly closed. When the woman returned, she set the key on the counter. I reached for it and immediately pulled my hand back. The key was ice cold. Not cool, not room temperature, but freezing cold, as if it had been stored in a freezer. Rule 11. If the key returns cold as ice, clean the bathroom immediately, regardless of the time. "Thanks," the woman said, not seeming to notice my reaction. "Good luck with your shift." And then she was gone, the bell chiming cheerfully as she exited into the night. I stared at the frozen key for a long moment. Every rational part of my brain said this was impossible. Keys don't become ice cold in the span of 5 minutes. But here it was, frost literally forming on the metal surface as I watched. I grabbed a paper towel to pick it up, not wanting to touch it directly, and headed for the bathroom. The hallway to the bathroom was narrow and dim, lit by a single bulb that cast long shadows. I pushed open the door and fumbled for the light switch. The bathroom was small, just a toilet, sink, and mirror, and appeared empty. But the temperature was wrong. It was freezing, my breath forming clouds, and there was a smell. Not the usual bathroom smell, but something else. Something organic and sweet and rotten all at once, like flowers left too long in a vase. The mirror had fogged over, which should have been impossible in this cold. And in the condensation, someone had written a single word with their finger: leave. I stood there, staring at that message, my heart pounding so hard I could hear in my ears. The word was clear, undeniable, written in a shaky hand by someone, or something, that wanted me gone. For several seconds, I seriously considered taking the advice. I could grab my keys, run to my car, and never come back. Forget the money. Forget the job. Forget whatever nightmare I'd stumbled into. But then I thought about my student loans, my rent, my empty refrigerator. I thought about how hard it had been to find this job, how few options I had, and I thought about Ray's words. Previous night's shift guy lasted 3 months. 3 months. Someone had survived here for 3 months. If they could do it, maybe I could too. I grabbed cleaning supplies from under the sink, the regular ones, not the mysterious red bottle I'd seen earlier, and cleaned the bathroom quickly but thoroughly. I wiped the mirror, erasing that single word, watching it disappear under the cloth. By the time I finished, the temperature had returned to normal, and that strange smell had faded. I hung the key back on its hook behind the counter and tried to pretend everything was fine. At 2 a.m., a man walked in, or rather, something that looked like a man. He was tall, wearing a dusty denim jacket and work boots, with a face that seemed somehow out of focus, like I couldn't quite make out his features no matter how hard I tried to look at them. He walked directly to aisle 3, disappeared between shelves for exactly 30 seconds, then walked back out. He approached the counter and placed a candy bar down. A Snickers, perfectly ordinary. "That'll be $1.50, I said, my voice barely steady. He reached into his pocket and pulled out coins. Old coins. I could see dates as he counted them out. 1952, 1948, 1951. The same coins in perfect condition, as if they'd been minted yesterday. He placed them on the counter, and when his fingers brushed the surface, I noticed something. No warmth, no impression. It was like watching a projection, a hologram, something not quite there. "Thanks," he said, his voice echoing strangely, as if coming from a distance. Long drive ahead. He picked up the candy bar and walked toward the door. The bell didn't ring. He simply passed through the entrance as if the door wasn't there, and then he was gone, dissolving into the darkness outside. I stood there, staring at the coins on the counter. After a moment's hesitation, I picked them up. They were real, solid, old and valuable probably. I added them to the register and made a note on the inventory sheet, trying to pretend I just had a normal transaction with a normal customer. But my hands were shaking, and when I caught my reflection in the dark window, I saw my face was pale, my eyes too wide. I looked like someone on the edge of breaking, and I'd only been here 6 hours. 10 more hours to go. 10 more hours of rules and shadows and things that shouldn't exist. I checked the laminated sheet again, reading through each rule, looking for something I missed, some clue about what I was supposed to do, how I was supposed to survive this. And there, at the bottom, in smaller print, I noticed something I'd overlooked before. These rules are updated regularly based on employee reports. If you experience something not covered by the current rules, write a detailed account and leave it in the storage room. If you survive your shift, your report will be considered for inclusion in the next revision. If I survive, not when, if. That's when I realized the full truth. This wasn't just a strange job. This wasn't just a haunted building. This was something worse, something ongoing, something that had been happening for decades. Since 1952, according to that sign outside. And the rules weren't protection. They were just a survival guide, a map through a minefield that claimed victims regularly. The knocking started again from the storage room. Knock, knock, knock. More insistent this time, more desperate. I turned up the radio someone had left behind the counter, letting classic rock drown out the knocking. I'd follow the rules. I'd survive this shift, and then I'd decide whether any amount of money was worth coming back tomorrow night. But something told me that once you worked even one shift at the Stop and Go tuck shop, leaving wasn't as simple as just not showing up. Something told me I was already in deeper than I realized. The night was only half over. At 3 a.m., the fluorescent lights began to flicker in a pattern. Not random flickering like before, but deliberate. 3 quick flashes, pause. 2 quick flashes, pause, repeat. I watched from behind the counter as the sequence continued for nearly 5 minutes, casting the shop in a strobe light effect that made everything feel surreal and disjointed. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, The flickering stopped, and the lights returned to their normal buzzing consistency. I've been standing in the same spot for so long that my legs had started to ache. I forced myself to move, to walk the aisles, to check expiration dates on products like a normal employee. But there was nothing normal about the way the shop felt now, deep in the dead hours of the morning. The air itself seemed thicker, harder to breathe, like the building was pressing in on itself. As I walked past aisle 2, I heard for the first time a whisper, soft, indistinct, impossible to make out individual words. It sounded like someone speaking just below the threshold of comprehension, a constant murmur coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stopped, listening, trying to determine the source. The whisper continued, rising and falling in volume, but never quite becoming intelligible. It seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, or from the spaces between the shelves, or from underneath the floor. The sound made my skin crawl, made every hair on my body stand on end. There was something wrong about it, something fundamentally unnatural in the way it echoed and overlapped, as if multiple voices were speaking the same words at slightly different times, creating a disturbing harmony. "Hello," I called out, immediately regretting it. The whisper stopped. Complete silence. Even the refrigerators seemed to have fallen quiet. I stood in that silence for 10 seconds, 15, 20. And then the whisper returned, but closer now. Much closer. Right behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Empty aisle. But the whisper continued, moving again, circling around me like a predator, sizing up prey. I backed toward the counter, keeping my eyes moving, scanning for any sign of what was making that sound. The whisper followed, always just out of sight, always moving. When I reached the relative safety of the counter area, I grabbed the laminated rules sheet and scanned through it again desperately. Nothing about whispers. Nothing about voices. This was something new, something that hadn't been documented yet. Or maybe previous workers hadn't survived long enough to report it. The door chimed, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. An elderly man shuffled in, moving slowly with the aid of a wooden cane. He wore clothes that seemed out of place, a suit that looked like it came from the 1960s, complete with a thin tie and polished shoes that clicked against the linoleum. His face was deeply lined, his eyes milky with cataracts. But when he looked at me, I felt a chill. Those eyes saw more than they should. "Evening, son," he said, his voice crackling like old paper. "Still working the night shift, I see." "Yes, sir," I replied cautiously. "Can I help you find something?" He smiled, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect. "Oh, I know where everything is. Work here myself, you see. Long time ago. Very long time." He shuffled toward aisle 3, and I tensed, remembering the shadow, remembering Rule 4. 50 years, give or take. Started in 52, back when this place was new, back when we didn't understand what we built on. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. I watched as he disappeared into aisle 3, his cane tapping a slow rhythm against the floor. 1 tap, 2 taps, 3 taps. The sound echoed strangely, seeming to come from different directions simultaneously. Minutes passed. 5, then 10. He didn't emerge. I could still hear that tapping, could still hear his footsteps, but they never came closer to the end of the aisle. It was as if he was walking in place, or walking somewhere that didn't follow normal spatial rules. The whispers had started again, too, and they seemed to be responding to his footsteps, rising and falling in time with the tapping of his cane. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. Moving cautiously around the counter, I approached aisle 3 from an angle that would let me see down its length without fully entering it. I peered around the corner. The aisle was empty. No elderly man. No shadow. No anything. Just shelves of candy and chips. Perfectly ordinary in every way except for the temperature, which was still noticeably colder than the rest of the shop. The tapping sound continued for another few seconds, then faded into silence. I backed away slowly, returning to the counter. The old man had never emerged from the aisle. He'd simply disappeared, dissolved into whatever pocket of wrongness existed in that space. But on the counter, where there had been nothing before, sat 3 coins. The same old coins from earlier, dated 1952, 1948, and 1951. Payment for a transaction that never occurred from a customer who no longer existed. At 3:30, I discovered the notebook. It was hidden under the counter, tucked behind the register where someone had clearly placed it deliberately. A black composition notebook with water-stained cover and yellow pages. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The first entry was dated March 15th, 1987, third night. The rules help, but they don't explain. Saw the shadow again in aisle 3. It's getting bolder. Last night it was just a shape. Tonight it moved. Tomorrow I think it might do more. Manager Raymond says don't worry. Says the rules keep us safe. But I've been asking around. This is my 3rd night. The average survival time is 18 days. Not employment time. Survival time. I flipped through the pages, my heart sinking as I read entry after entry. Different handwriting, different dates spanning decades, but the same themes. The shadow that grew bolder, the knocking that became more insistent, the customers who weren't quite real, the whispers that drove some workers slowly mad. One entry stood out, dated just 3 months ago. Date 89. I've figured out some of it, I think. This place was built on something old, something that should have stayed buried. The rules aren't protection. They're a contract, a negotiation. As long as we follow them, we're acknowledging their territory while maintaining our own. But the balance is fragile. Every rule that's broken weakens the barrier. And every night, they test us. They push. They whisper. They knock. They're trying to make us break, trying to make us fail. Because if we do, the entry ended abruptly, the pen trailing off in a jagged line, as if the writer had been pulled away mid-sentence. That was the last entry, 3 months ago, right when Ray said the previous night worker had quit. Or had he quit? Had he simply disappeared mid-shift, pulled into whatever existed on the other side of the rules? I was about to close the notebook when I noticed something on the very last page. Fresh writing, ink that was still slightly wet. It hadn't been there when I first opened the book, I was certain. The words were scrawled in a desperate hand. Don't trust the daylight. My blood ran cold. Someone, or something, had just written in this notebook while I was holding it. While I was looking at it, I slammed it shut and shoved it back under the counter, my heart hammering. Don't trust the daylight. What did that mean? Was it a warning about Rule 12? About not leaving until sunlight came? Or something else entirely? The phone rang again at 4 a.m. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering, knowing I had to, knowing the rules demanded it. Stop and Go Tuck Shop. How can I help you? What year is it? The voice on the other end was hollow, distant, like it was calling from the bottom of a well. Rule 6. If someone asks what year it is, tell them, and then immediately unplug the phone for 1 hour. It's 2025, I said, my mouth dry. A long pause. Then, in that same hollow voice, no, that can't be right. I just started my shift. It was 1987. It was just 1987. How did? I unplugged the phone, cutting off whatever it was about to say. My hand was shaking badly now. That voice had been terrified, confused, lost. Was it a previous worker? Someone who'd gotten trapped here somehow, caught in whatever wrongness permeated this place? Or was it just another trick, another test, another way for whatever haunted the stop and go to get inside my head? The whispers had returned, louder now, and this time I could almost make out words. Almost. It was like listening to a conversation through a wall, catching syllables, but never quite grasping meaning. The whispers seemed to be coming from every direction at once, converging on the counter where I stood. I grabbed the radio and turned the volume up higher, letting rock music drown them out. But even through the music, I could hear them underneath, persistent, patient. At 4:30, something happened that wasn't in the rules. The door opened. Not violently, not dramatically, just swung open smoothly as if someone had pushed it. But there was no one there. The bell should have chimed. It always chimed, even in impossible circumstances. But this time, silence. The door just stood open to the darkness outside, letting cold desert air flow into the shop. I stared at that open door, every instinct screaming at me to go close it, to lock it, to keep whatever was outside from coming in. But another instinct, deeper and older, told me that going to that door would be a mistake, that stepping into that threshold would be crossing a line I couldn't uncross. For 5 minutes, I watched that door. The cold air kept flowing in. The darkness outside seemed absolute, impenetrable, as if the parking lot lights had all gone out. I could see nothing beyond the doorway. No stars, no horizon, no parking lot, just void. And then something moved in that void, a shape darker than the darkness, solidifying slowly. The shadow from aisle 3, but larger now, bolder, standing in the doorway like it was testing whether it could enter. I remembered Rule 4 with sudden clarity. Don't look at it directly. I forced my eyes down to the counter, to the inventory sheets I'd been pretending to work on all night. In my peripheral vision, I could see the shadow move. It stood in the doorway for another minute, and I could feel its attention on me, could sense it watching, evaluating. Then, with a movement that seemed to take tremendous effort, it retreated back into the darkness. The door swung closed. The bell chimed. Relief flooded through me, so intensely I nearly collapsed. It had tested the boundaries and found them still intact. The rules had held. Whatever contract or barrier they represented was still in place. For now. But I understood something crucial in that moment. This wasn't just a haunted building. This was something actively malevolent, something intelligent and patient that was constantly probing for weaknesses. The rules weren't arbitrary traditions. They were a carefully constructed defense system, built up over decades of trial and error, written in the experiences and possibly the lives of everyone who'd worked here before me. At 5 a.m., a family pulled into the parking lot. I watched through the window as they climbed out. Mother, father, 2 young children. Normal. Blessedly, wonderfully normal. The sight of them almost brought tears to my eyes. Real people, real customers, real life intruding on this nightmare. They entered the shop, the bell chiming cheerfully, and the children immediately ran toward the candy aisle. Aisle 3. My heart stopped. Wait, I called out, more sharply than I intended. The parents looked at me with surprise and a hint of concern. The children paused. Sorry, I said, forcing a smile. Just that the floor in that aisle was just mopped. Still wet. Dangerous. How about aisle 2? We've got candy there too. The mother smiled gratefully. Come on, kids, you heard the nice man. She redirected them to aisle 2, and I sagged with relief. I just saved them from something. I was sure of it. At 5 a.m., the shop felt different. The shadow in aisle 3 had retreated or disappeared. The whispers had faded. The temperature had normalized. It was as if whatever ruled the night hours was preparing to yield the daylight, to retreat into whatever spaces it occupied during normal hours. The family bought their snacks, used the bathroom without incident. The key returned at normal temperature and left with friendly waves. Normal transaction, normal people, normal world. For a few minutes, I could almost believe that everything that had happened during the night had been my imagination, stress-induced hallucinations, the product of an overtired mind. But the notebook under the counter was real. The old coins in the register were real. The rules on the laminated sheet were real. And the memory of that shadow, standing in the doorway, testing the boundaries, was far too vivid to be imagination. At 5:30, the sky outside began to lighten. Not true dawn yet, but that pre-dawn glow that promises the sun is coming. I found myself watching the windows obsessively, checking the sky every few seconds. Rule 12 echoed in my mind. If dawn hasn't broken by 6:15 a.m., remain inside with the door locked until you see sunlight. Why that rule? What could possibly prevent dawn from breaking? The question terrified me more than I wanted to admit. At 5:45, Ray's pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. I watched him climb out, moving with the stiff movements of someone who'd done the same routine for too many years. He approached the door, and when he entered, his eyes went immediately to my face, studying me intently. "You made it," he said. It wasn't a question, but there was something in his tone. Surprise, maybe, or approval. I followed the rules. I replied, hearing how exhausted I sounded. Ray nodded slowly. The shadow. Saw it. Didn't look at it directly. The knocking. Ignored it. The phone. Answered. Got the ear question. Unplugged it. Ray moved behind the counter, his movements practiced and economical. He pulled out the notebook, flipped through it, and I saw his eyebrows raise slightly when he saw the fresh entry on the last page. "Don't trust the daylight," he read aloud. He looked at me. "Did you write this?" "No." It appeared while I was holding the book. Something flickered across Ray's face. Fear? Concern? He closed the notebook and tucked it away. "You had visitors," he said, noticing the old coins in the register. "The collector, the old man," I confirmed. "Said he worked here in 52. In a manner of speaking, he did." Ray counted the register, his fingers moving quickly through the bills and coins. $217.85. Off by $17.85. You know what that means. I thought back to Rule 1. If the amount doesn't match, count again. If it still doesn't match, leave it. I shouldn't investigate. Smart. That $17.85 is a toll. A payment. You don't question it. You don't refuse it. You just acknowledge it and move on. He made a note on a ledger I hadn't seen before. Every night, it's a different amount. Has been for 70 years. As long as we pay, the contract holds. What contract? The question burst out of me. What is this place? What's really happening here? Ray studied me for a long moment, seeming to decide something. You lasted the night. That gives you the right to know some of it. Not everything. Knowing everything is dangerous, but some. He glanced toward the windows, where dawn was painting the sky pink and gold. This shop was built in 1952 by my grandfather. He wanted a business on this stretch of highway. Didn't care that the locals warned him about the land. Old burial ground, they said. Sacred space. Cursed space. Different people told him different stories, but they all said the same thing. Don't build here. But he did anyway, I said. He did. And at first, everything was fine. Normal business, normal customers. And then the night crew started reporting problems. Things moving. Voices. Shadows. 3 employees quit in the first month. 2 more disappeared without a trace. My grandfather nearly went bankrupt trying to keep the place staffed. Ray pulled out a cigarette but didn't light it, just rolled it between his fingers. Then someone, we don't know who, figured out the rules. Figured out that if you followed certain protocols, if you acknowledged certain boundaries, you could survive a shift. The rules got written down, refined over decades. And as long as someone works the night shift, as long as someone follows the rules, the presence stays contained to this building. And if someone doesn't work the shift? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Ray finally lit his cigarette, took a long drag. We don't find out. Because there's always someone desperate enough, broke enough, brave enough, or foolish enough to take the job. He looked at me significantly. Someone like you. Outside, the sun broke over the horizon, genuine daylight flooding the parking lot. I felt tension I hadn't realized I was carrying drain on my shoulders. Daylight. Real, pure daylight. The nightmare was over. For now. Your shift is done, Ray said. You can go. Come back tonight at 8. Or don't. Choice is yours. I gather my things, my backpack feeling heavier than when I'd arrived. As I headed for the door, I paused. The notebook entry. Don't trust the daylight. What does that mean? Ray's expression darkened. It means that what happens here doesn't always stay inside these walls. It means that once you're part of the pattern, once you've worked a night shift, you're connected to this place in ways you might not understand yet. He paused. It means be careful driving home, Derek. And when you look in your rearview mirror, make sure it's just your own eyes looking back. I left the stop-and-go tuck shop at 6:02 a.m., stepping out into the warm Texas sunrise. My car was exactly where I'd left it. The highway stretched before me, ordinary and familiar. Everything looked normal. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out of that shop. And when I glanced in my rearview mirror, just for a second, I could have sworn I saw a shadow in my back seat. A shadow that disappeared when I looked directly at it. I should have called Ray and quit. I should have driven home, slept for 12 hours, and never thought about the stop-and-go tuck shop again. That's what any sane person would have done. Instead, I found myself pulling into that gravel parking lot again at 7:55 p.m., watching the sun sink below the horizon like a stone dropped into dark water. The money was good. That was the rational explanation I gave myself. One night's pay had covered my portion of rent. A week would handle my outstanding bills. A month might actually give me some breathing room. But underneath that practical reasoning lurked something else, something I didn't want to examine too closely. Curiosity. The same deadly curiosity that the rules warned against. The same impulse that had gotten previous workers killed or worse. I wanted to understand. I wanted to know what existed in that space between the rules and reality. I wanted to see how deep the strangeness went. Ray was waiting inside, and when he saw me walk through the door, something passed across his face. Not quite disappointment, not quite approval. Recognition, maybe. The look of someone seeing their own past mistakes reflected in another person. "You came back," he said simply. "I need the money." "Sure you do." He handed me the keys and the laminated rule sheet. Second night is often worse than the first. You know enough now to be afraid, but not enough to be truly careful. Pay attention. Follow every rule exactly. And Derek, he paused at the door. If something happens that's not covered by the rules, use your judgment. But remember, your judgment is limited by being alive and human. Their judgment isn't limited by anything. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the humming fluorescent silence. I started my shift the same way as before, counting the register, checking expiration dates, try to maintain the illusion of normalcy. But this time, I kept the notebook out on the counter where I could see it. I'd brought a pen from home. If I survived this shift, I'd add my own entry, document what I'd learned, maybe help whoever came after me. The first customer arrived at 8:45, a trucker who bought coffee and cigarettes and left without incident. Normal. But I noticed something I'd missed the night before. The security camera monitor showed him entering and leaving, but there was a 3-second delay. He'd exit the frame on the screen 3 seconds after I watched him physically leave, as if the cameras were showing me the recent past, not the present. At 9:30, the temperature in the shop dropped suddenly. My breath formed clouds. I knew what that meant before I even looked. The shadow had returned to aisle 3, darker and more defined than before. But this time, it wasn't alone. I could see 2 shadows now. The original one, standing motionless between the shelves, and a second one that seemed to be pacing back and forth at the far end of the aisle. Neither had distinct features, but I could sense their attention on me, could feel them watching with interest I didn't understand and didn't want to. Rule 4. Don't look at them directly. Continue your work. But it was harder tonight. So much harder. Because the shadows weren't static anymore. They were interacting with each other, moving in ways that suggested communication, purpose. One would shift, and the other would respond. They were coordinating something. At 10:15, a woman walked in who made every hair on my body stand on end. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost aggressive. Perfect features, perfect hair, perfect clothes that looked expensive and out of place in a highway tuck shop. but her movements were wrong. Slightly too smooth, slightly too fluid, like watching a video played at the wrong speed. "Good evening," she said, her voice having the same hollow quality as the phone call from last night. "I'd like to buy some candy." "Sure." I manage my throat dry. "Aisle 3 has." "I know where it is." She walked directly to aisle 3, and I watched in horror as she stepped into the cold spot, into the space where the two shadows stood. For a moment, she was surrounded by that darkness, and I could see the shadows react, converging on her. Then she emerged, holding a chocolate bar that I knew for certain hadn't been on the shelf yesterday. The wrapper was wrong. The design was decades old, vintage 1950s styling. She placed it on the counter, and when I picked it up to scan it, the wrapper crinkled like ancient paper. "That'll be..." I started, but she was already placing coins on the counter. More old coins. 1952, 1948, 1951. The same 3 dates, always the same 3 dates. She smiled at me, and I saw that her teeth were too white, too perfect, and when she spoke, her lips didn't quite match the words. "Thank you for your service," she said, and then added, so quietly I almost missed it, "Time is different here. Be careful how much of it you spend." She left, the bell chiming, and I watched through the window as she walked into the parking lot. 10 steps from the door, she simply dissolved into the darkness, there 1 second and gone the next, as if she'd been a projection that someone had switched off. I looked down at the chocolate bar she'd left behind. The date on the wrapper, printed in faded ink, read, "Best before December 1952. At 11 p.m., the coffee machine started brewing again, right on schedule. But this time, I heard something else, a voice soft and distant, coming from the direction of the machine. I strained to hear it, to make out words, knowing I probably shouldn't, but unable to resist. "Help me." The voice was female, young, terrified. "Please, someone help me. I don't know how long I've been." The coffee finished brewing. The voice stopped. I stared at that full pot of steaming liquid, and I understood with sudden horrible clarity that the rules weren't just about avoiding danger. They were about avoiding knowledge, about not seeing too deeply into what this place really was. The knocking from a storage room started at midnight, exactly as it had before. But tonight, it was accompanied by a voice. "Knock, knock, knock," then, "Let me out. Please. I've been in here so long. Please, just open the door." The voice sounded real. Not hollow like the phone voice or the coffee machine whisper, but genuinely human, genuinely desperate. It sounded like someone who'd been trapped in that storage room for hours, maybe days. Every instinct screamed at me to help, to unlock that door, to rescue whoever was inside. But Rule 7 was absolute. Do not respond. Do not open the door. Please. The voice was crying now. "I'm so cold. It's so dark. I just want to go home. Please, I know you can hear me. Why won't you help me?" I cranked up the radio, letting music drown out that pleading voice. But even through the music, I could hear it. And worse, I could hear myself starting to rationalize. What if someone really was trapped in there? What if a customer had gotten locked in somehow? What if breaking this one rule, just this once, would actually save someone? That's how they get you, I realized. That's how they make you break the rules. They find your humanity, your compassion, your decent instincts, and they weaponize them. The knocking and pleading continued for 20 minutes. Then, suddenly it stopped. Silence. And in that silence, I heard footsteps in the storage room. Not walking toward the door this time, but walking away. Walking deeper into a space that should only be 10 feet deep. Walking downstairs that didn't exist. At 12:30 a.m., a bus pulled into the parking lot. An actual bus, like a school bus. Painted yellow but covered in decades of dust and grime. I watched in disbelief as the door opened and children began filing out. 7 of them, ranging in age from maybe 6 to 12, all wearing clothes from different eras. One girl had a dress from the 1950s. A boy wore bell-bottoms from the 1970s. Another child had the bright windbreaker style of the 1990s. They walked in a single file line toward the shop, moving in perfect synchronization. When they reached the door, they stopped, just stood there, staring in at me through the glass. 7 pairs of eyes, unblinking, expressionless, waiting. I checked the rules frantically. Nothing about children, nothing about buses. This was new territory, undocumented danger. I thought about the Notebook's advice. If something happens that's not covered by the rules, use your judgment. My judgment told me not to let them in. My judgment told me that whatever those things were, they weren't really children. They were wearing children like masks, using familiar forms to make me lower my guard. We stood in a silent standoff for 5 minutes. Me behind the counter, them outside the door. Not moving, not speaking, just waiting to see what I would do. Finally, one of them, the girl in the 1950s dress, raised her hand and placed it against the glass. Where her palm touched, frost spread outward in fractal patterns. "Let us in," she said, her voice muffled by the glass but clear enough. "We're cold. We're hungry. We just want candy. We're closed." I lied, my voice shaking. "No, you're not. The sign says open 24 hours. Private event tonight. Come back tomorrow." The girl's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Something ancient and angry. "Liar," she said softly. "We know what you are. We know you can see us. We know you're afraid." "I'm calling the police," I said, reaching for the phone, though I knew it was unplugged and would be for another 20 minutes per Rule 6. "Call them," the girl said. "See if they come. See if anyone comes when you call from here." Then, as one, all 7 children turned and walked back to the bus. They climbed aboard in the same synchronized file. The door closed, and the bus pulled out of the parking lot. I watched it drive down the highway, its taillights visible for maybe a quarter mile, and then it simply vanished. Didn't drive out of sight, didn't turn off, just ceased to exist. I sat down heavily on the stool behind the counter, my legs unable to hold me anymore. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to clasp them together. That had been close. Too close. They tried to make me open the door, tried to make me invite them in. And I had no idea what would have happened if I had. But I knew with absolute certainty that I wouldn't be sitting here now if I'd made that mistake. At 1 a.m., I checked the security monitor per my usual routine. The cycling views showed the normal scenes. Empty parking lot, quiet aisles, storage room door firmly closed. Then the view switched to the camera showing the counter area, showing me from behind. I watched myself on the screen. Watched my screen cell stand up, move around the counter, and walk toward aisle 3. I wasn't doing any of those things. I was sitting perfectly still, watching the monitor. But my screen self kept moving, kept walking, and then stepped into aisle 3 and disappeared into the cold darkness where the shadows waited. The view cycled away, then came back. My screen self was behind the counter again, sitting on the stool, exactly where I actually was, as if nothing had happened. Rule 3 said to turn off the monitor when I saw myself doing things I wasn't doing. But this felt different. This felt like I was seeing what could happen. What might happen? What would happen if I made the wrong choice? A warning or a threat? I couldn't tell which. I turned off the monitor. At 2 a.m., the old man returned. The same one from last night, with his vintage suit and his wooden cane and his eyes that saw too much. He shuffled in, the bell chiming, and this time he came directly to the counter instead of heading to aisle 3. Second night, he observed, settling onto the stool beside the register with a weary sigh. Impressive. Most don't come back. They feel it after the first shift, feel how this place gets into you, and they're smart enough to stay away. "You said you worked here in 52, I said, needing to talk to someone, even if that someone wasn't entirely real. "Worked here. Work here." Time gets confused in this place. Sometimes I think I'm still on my first shift, that I never really left. Sometimes I think all of us are still here, all the night workers from 70 years of shifts, all trapped in our various midnights, all following rules that can't quite keep us safe. He pulled out 3 coins, those same dated coins, and set them on the counter. For your trouble, for bearing witness. Witness to what? To us. To what happens when you build on cursed ground and try to pretend everything's normal. To what happens when you make a contract with something that doesn't think the way humans think, doesn't value what humans value. He stood up slowly, leaning heavily on his cane. The rules keep you alive, boy, but they exact a price. Every shift you work here, you leave a little bit of yourself behind. A little piece of your time, your life, your soul if you believe in such things. And eventually, if you work enough shifts, you become like me. Still here, always here, forever here. He shuffled toward the door, then paused. The shadows in aisle 3, they're not monsters. They're employees, or they were once. Workers who broke the wrong rules, made the wrong choices, and found out that death isn't the worst thing that can happen in a place like this. Then he walked out, and this time I watched carefully. He walked past my car, past where the parking lot should end, and kept walking into the darkness. After 20 steps, he faded like a photograph left in the sun, growing lighter and lighter until he was gone. I pulled out the notebook and wrote, "Second shift. Children at the door, don't let them in. Monitors showing alternate reality, warnings or threats. Old man says shadows are former employees. Time leaves pieces of us here. Is this job worth it?" As I wrote, new words appeared on the next page in different handwriting. Nothing is worth this. But it's too late for warning. You came back. You're already part of the pattern. The only way out is through. Keep following the rules. It's your only chance. The rest of the night passed in a blur of tension and exhaustion. More whispers in the aisles. The bell ringing when no one was at the door. The coffee pot somehow draining and refilling itself. Small impossibilities that had become almost routine. At 5:45 a.m., Ray returned. He looked at me, at the notebook, at the old coins in the register, and nodded slowly. "You met Edgar," he said, seeing the coins. "The old man?" He said he worked here in 52. He did. He also worked here in 53 and 54 and every year since. He followed the rules perfectly, never broke one. But he worked too many shifts, and eventually the place wouldn't let him go. Now he's part of it, just like the shadows, just like the whispers. Ray counted the register. Off by 1423 tonight. The toll varies, but it's always collected. How long? I asked. How long can someone work here before they end up like Edgar? Ray lit a cigarette, blew smoke toward the ceiling. Varies. Edgar lasted 6 months of regular shifts. Others have lasted years, just doing 1 or 2 nights a week. It's not about time, not exactly. It's about how much of yourself you're willing to pay. Some people, they do their shifts and go home and never think about this place until the next shift. They last longer. Others, they can't stop thinking about it, can't stop trying to figure it out, can't stop being curious. He looked at me meaningfully. Those ones get consumed faster. The sun rose, beautiful and ordinary. My second shift was over. I'd survived again. But as I drove home, I couldn't stop checking my rearview mirror. Couldn't stop seeing shadows in my peripheral vision. Couldn't stop feeling like I'd left pieces of myself scattered across the aisles of the stop-and-go tuck shop. Pieces I would never get back. That night, in my apartment, I dreamed about the storage room. Dreamed about walking down those impossible stairs in the darkness. Dreamed about all the people who'd opened that door when they shouldn't have, and what they'd found waiting for them. I woke up at 3 a.m. Of course it was 3 a.m., and for just a moment, I could have sworn I heard knocking coming from my closet. One week, I'd worked 7 consecutive nights at the stop-and-go tuck shop, and I was beginning to understand what Ray meant about the place getting into you. The shadows follow me home now, flickering in my peripheral vision when I was trying to sleep. The whispers echoed in my ears during the day, just quiet enough that I could almost convince myself they were tinnitus or imagination. Almost. But the money was accumulating in my bank account. Enough to pay off bills. Enough to build a small cushion. Enough to make me think that maybe, just maybe, I could do another week. Just one more week, and then I quit. That's what I kept telling myself. It was a lie, and somewhere deep down I knew it. On my 8th night, things changed. I arrived at the usual time, and Ray handed me the keys with a strange expression on his weathered face. "There's something different tonight," he said. "I can feel it. The air's wrong. The shop feels hungry." He paused, debating whether to continue. "I've worked here longer than anyone, Derek. 37 years. I know this place's rhythms. And tonight, it's going to test you harder than before. I'll follow the rules," I said, like always. Like it was a mantra that could protect me. The rules might not be enough tonight. Sometimes on certain nights, the rules just keep you alive. They don't keep you safe. He started to leave, then turn back. If it gets too bad, if you really feel like you're in danger, there's one thing you can do. One thing that's not in the rules because it's a last resort. You can leave. Just walk out. Forfeit the shift. But understand, if you do that, you can never come back. Not to work, not to visit. This place will be closed to you forever. And there will be consequences. Not immediate, but eventual. The toll still has to be paid, one way or another. Then he was gone, and I was alone in the shop. It felt different immediately. The air was thicker, heavier, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. The fluorescent lights flickered more aggressively. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, more substantial. And there was a sound, barely audible, like distant thunder or a giant heart beating somewhere beneath the floor. My first customer of the night arrived at 8:30. He was a truck driver, ordinary in every way except for his eyes. When he looked at me, his pupils were wrong. Too large, too dark, like looking into tunnels that went somewhere no human should go. "Pack of Marlboros," he said, his voice normal enough. I retrieved them from behind the counter, and when I handed them over, our fingers touched briefly. His skin was cold. Not just cool, but dead person cold. The temperature of something that had never been warm. He smiled, showing normal teeth. "Long night ahead of you," he said. "Longer than most. They're going to push hard tonight. See how much you can take before you break." "Who's they?" I asked before I could stop myself. "The place. The presence. The things that were here before and will be here after. Names don't matter. What matters is whether you're strong enough." He took his cigarettes and walked out, the bell chiming. I watched through the window as he climbed into his truck and drove away, his vehicle looking normal and real until it reached the edge of the parking lot. Then, for just a second, I could see through it, literally through it, like it was a ghost or a hologram. Then it was gone. At 9 p.m., all three shadows appeared in aisle 3 simultaneously. Not just standing there anymore, but moving, pacing, circling each other like wolves preparing for a hunt. I could feel their attention on me constantly now, could sense them watching even when I couldn't see them directly. The temperature in the shop had dropped to the point where I could see my breath, and frost was forming on the windows. The knocking from the storage room started early, 10 p.m. instead of midnight. And this time, there were multiple voices. "Please let us out. We've been in here so long. Just open the door. We're so cold. We just want to go home." Men, women, children, all begging, all pleading, all sounding so desperately human that my hand moved toward the storage room key before I caught myself. Rule 7. Never open that door. But tonight, the voices didn't stop after 5 or 10 minutes. They continued, constant, overlapping, creating a chorus of desperation that wore at my resolve like water eroding stone. At 11 p.m., the coffee machine not only brewed itself, but overflowed, just like Rule 9 warned could happen. Hot coffee poured on a counter, onto the floor, creating a spreading puddle I was supposed to ignore until morning. But in the surface of that dark liquid, I could see images, reflections that weren't reflections. I saw Edgar, the old man, but younger, working behind the counter in clothes from the 1950s. I saw a woman I didn't recognize, eyes wide with terror, reaching towards something I couldn't see. I saw others, dozens of others, all-night shift workers, all trapped in their own personal moments of horror. Then I saw myself, but not as I was now. I saw myself years older, decades older, wearing clothes that hadn't come into style yet. My reflection looked directly at me from the coffee puddle and mouthed words I could clearly read. Get out. Tonight. While you still can. I forced myself to look away, to ignore Rule 9 completely and grab paper towels to clean up the spill. The rule said to leave it, but seeing my own future reflection in that cursed liquid was too much. As I wiped it up, the images swirled and faded, and I heard a sound like a sigh. Either disappointment or relief, I couldn't tell which. At midnight, something unprecedented happened. All the lights in the shop went out. Complete darkness. The kind of darkness that felt solid, oppressive, like being buried alive. I fumbled for my phone, needing any source of light, and its screen provided a small circle of illumination that barely reached past my hands. In that limited light, I saw them. The shadows weren't just in aisle 3 anymore. They were everywhere, surrounding the counter. Dozens of them, maybe more, all those human-shaped voids in space. And they were moving closer. Derek, my name whispered in the darkness, in voices that sounded like wind through a graveyard. Derek, look at us. See us. Understand us. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I remembered Ray's warning. Leaving meant consequences. Leaving meant the toll would still come due. So instead, I stood my ground, phone in hand, watching those shadows inch closer. We were like you. The whispers continued. Workers, employees, people who needed money and didn't ask enough questions. The rules kept us alive. But alive isn't the same as free. Alive isn't the same as human. We follow the rules, Derek. Every single one. And look what we became. The lights flickered back on, and the shadows retreated to aisle 3. But I'd seen them clearly now, seen how many there were. At least 20 distinct forms. 20 former employees who'd become part of the shop's permanent collection. The phone rang at 12:15 a.m. I answered it with trembling hands. What year is it? The hollow voice asked. 2025, I replied automatically. But before I could unplug the phone per Rule 6, the voice continued. Wrong. It's always 1952 here. It's always the first shift. It's always midnight. Time doesn't pass in this place, Derek. It accumulates. It layers. Every night shift that's ever been worked is still being worked, all happening simultaneously in different layers of the same moment. That's why we can't leave. That's why the rules exist. They're not protection. They're a containment protocol. They keep all these overlapping realities from collapsing into each other. I unplugged the phone with shaking hands, but the voice continued from the receiver lying on the counter, even though it was disconnected. You're already part of the pattern, already layered in. The question is whether you'll be conscious in your layer or whether you'll dissolve into shadow like we did. Follow the rules and fade slowly. Break them and fragment immediately. Or, the voice paused. Find the third option, the one nobody talks about. Then it went silent. At 1 a.m., children returned. Not the same 7 from a bus. These were different. They didn't come to the door this time. They simply appeared inside, materializing in the aisles like they'd always been there. I could see them in my peripheral vision, small shapes moving between the shelves, pulling items down, whispering to each other. I checked the rules desperately. Nothing about children inside the shop. Nothing about this scenario. This was uncharted territory. One of them, a little boy who couldn't have been more than 7, wearing pajamas that looked like they came from the 1960s, approached the counter. Up close, I could see he wasn't quite solid. Not transparent, but not entirely there either. Like a photograph that had been printed on silk and was now fluttering in an invisible breeze. "Mister," he said, his voice small and lost. "Can you tell me how to go home? I've been looking for a long time. I came here with my parents. They said to wait in the shop while they got gas." That was... He trailed off, confusion crossing his face. I don't remember when that was, but I've been waiting a really long time. My throat tightened. This wasn't a trick, or if it was the cruelest one yet. This child, or what remained of him, had gotten caught in this place decades ago and never escaped. He was another layer in the pattern, another piece of time that had accumulated here instead of passing normally. "I'm sorry," I whispered, not knowing what else to say. "I don't know how to help you." The boy's eyes filled with tears that didn't quite fall. "Nobody does. We're all stuck here. All of us who came at the wrong time, who stayed too long, who didn't understand what this place was until it was too late." He looked back toward the aisles, where I could see other small shapes moving. "We're not dangerous. We're just lost. But they are." He pointed toward aisle 3, toward where the shadows waited. "They used to be like you. Now they're hungry, and they're always looking for more." Then he faded, dissolving like morning mist, and the other children faded with him. At 2 a.m., Edgar appeared again, but this time he looked different, less solid than before. I could see through him to the shelves behind, could see him flickering like a bad television signal. "You're fading," I said. "Happens every 70 years, he replied, his voice distant and hollow. "The anniversary of my first shift, 1952 to 2022, was 70 years. 2022 to now, I've been fading. By next year, I'll be gone completely, or I'll become something else. Either way, Edgar won't exist anymore." He set his 3 coins on the counter, but they passed through the surface and clattered on the floor beneath. "I'm trying to warn you while I still can, while I still remember being human enough to care." "Warn me about what?" "Tonight's not random. It's your 8th shift. 8 is a significant number here. It's when the place decides if you're going to be a long-term employee or a short-term casualty. It's testing you, seeing if you'll break, seeing if you'll open that storage room door or look directly at the shadows or violate one of the big rules. If you do, you'll become like them immediately. If you don't, you'll become like me, slowly, over years, until there's nothing left of who you were." Ray said there was a third option, that I could just leave. Edgar's flickering form seemed to shudder. "You could, but the toll still comes due. Maybe not tonight or tomorrow, but eventually. You'll be driving down a highway, and suddenly you won't be able to remember where you were going. You'll be sitting in your apartment, and you'll hear knocking from your closet. You'll look in a mirror and see yourself standing in this shop, trapped in a moment that never ends. The place lets you leave, but it doesn't let you go. Then what do I do? That's the question nobody can answer for you. Every night shift worker has to figure out their own answer. Some choose to fade slowly. Some break and transform immediately. Some run and deal with the consequences. And some." He faded further, his voice becoming barely audible. "Some find a way to beat the pattern. It's rare, very rare, but it has happened. How? Tell me how." But Edgar was gone, dissolved completely, leaving only his voice hanging in the air like an echo. The rules are a prison, but they're also a map. Follow them perfectly enough, understand them deeply enough, and you'll see the door they're trying to hide. At 3 a.m., the storage room door opened by itself. I heard it clearly, the sound of the lock clicking, the hinges creaking, the door swinging wide. I didn't go to look. Rule 7 was absolute, but I could hear what was inside now. Footsteps, dozens of them, voices whispering in languages I didn't recognize, the sound of something enormous breathing, the crackle of fire that produced no light, the drip of water in a place that should be dry. Impossible sounds from an impossible space that extended far beyond the physical dimensions of the building. "Derek," a new voice from the storage room. This one I recognized. It was my own voice. "Derek, I need help. I'm trapped in here. I don't know how I got here. Please, you have to let me out. My future self, or a version of me from another layer of time, or a trick. I couldn't tell which, and it didn't matter. The rule was clear. I stayed at the counter, hands gripping the edge so tightly my knuckles turned white, and I didn't respond. Derek, the voice became desperate, angry. I'm you. I'm trapped in here because you won't help me. If you don't open this door, I'll be stuck here forever. Is that what you want? To trap yourself?" The storage room door slammed shut with a bang that shook the entire building. Silence. And in that silence, I understood. Edgar had been right. The rules were a map. They showed you all the ways the place could get you, all the vectors of attack. But they also showed you the pattern. The storage room was a trap for compassion. The shadows were a trap for curiosity. The phone calls were a trap for those who needed answers. The children were a trap for protection instinct. Every rule was showing me a different way the place tried to consume workers. And if I could recognize all the traps, if I could see the complete pattern, maybe I could find the spaces between them, the gaps where someone could exist without being caught. I pulled out the notebook and began writing frantically. Not a report of tonight's events, but an analysis. I listed every rule, and next to each one I wrote what it was really protecting against. What fear or instinct or human quality the place was exploiting. Rule 1. Exploits the need for things to make sense, the desire to investigate discrepancies. Rule 3. Exploits the disconnect between reality and perception, the fragmentation of self. Rule 4. Exploits curiosity about the unknown. Rule 6. Exploits the need for answers and understanding. Rule 7. Exploits compassion and the desire to help. As I wrote, something shifted in the shop. The air pressure changed. The whispers stopped. The shadows in aisle 3 stilled. It was like the building itself was paying attention, watching what I was doing with sudden interest. I kept writing, analyzing, breaking down the pattern. And slowly, a picture emerged. The rules weren't trying to protect workers from the place. They were trying to protect the place from workers. They were keeping employees contained, keeping them from understanding too much, from seeing the true structure of what had been built here. At 4 a.m., I had an epiphany. The rules created a maze, but like all mazes, they had a solution. The trick was to follow them so precisely, so perfectly, that you navigated the entire pattern without being caught by any single trap. You had to see all of it clearly, understand all of it completely, and in doing so, you find the exit. I looked at Rule 12. If dawn hasn't broken by 6:15 a.m., remain inside with the door locked until you see sunlight. That was the key. That was the exception that proved the pattern. Because what if dawn never came? What if you followed every other rule perfectly and then faced that final test? Most workers would panic, would try to leave anyway, would break the rule and get caught. But if you stayed, if you remained calm and waited, no matter how long it took, eventually, the place would have to release you. Because even this pocket of wrong time couldn't hold back the sun forever. At 5 a.m., Ray's truck didn't pull into the parking lot. At 5:30, the sky outside remained dark. No pre-dawn glow, no lightning horizon, just the same absolute darkness that had been there all night. At 5:45, I checked the clock again. The hands were moving. Time was passing normally inside the shop, but outside remained night. The test had begun. At 6 a.m., my shift should have ended, but dawn hadn't broken. Rule 12 was now in effect. I locked the door from the inside and settled onto my stool. I pulled out the notebook and continued writing, documenting everything, understanding everything, waiting. At 6:30, something spoke from all directions at once. You can leave. The door is locked from inside, which means you control it. You can leave anytime. Surely you want to leave? Surely you've had enough. I didn't respond. I just waited. At 7 a.m., The shadows began pouring out of aisle 3, filling the shop, surrounding the counter. But they didn't attack. They couldn't. I was following the rule. As long as dawn hadn't broken and I stayed inside, I was protected. At 8 a.m., the voice returned. No one has ever waited this long. No one has ever been this patient. Don't you understand? Dawn might never come. You could be trapped here forever. Then I'll be trapped here forever, I said calmly. But I'll be trapped following the rules perfectly. And that means you can't touch me. A sound like thunder rumbled through the building. Rage or frustration, or perhaps respect. I couldn't tell which. At 9 a.m., the first rays of sunlight broke through the eastern windows. Real sunlight. Genuine dawn. The shadows retreated instantly, flowing back into aisle 3 like water, draining from a sink. The whispers stopped. The temperature normalized. The oppressive weight of the place lifted. I unlocked the door and stepped outside. Ray's truck was pulling into the parking lot, exactly on schedule, as if no time had passed at all. He climbed out slowly, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Awe, maybe, or fear. You waited, he said. You actually waited it out. The rules said to wait until dawn. So I waited. Ray laughed, a sound with no humor in it. In 37 years, I've never seen dawn delayed more than 15 minutes. You waited 3 hours. 3 hours in there alone with everything this place could throw at you. And you just waited. He shook his head. You found it. The way out. What do you mean? You're free. The place tested you, and you won. You followed the rules so perfectly, understood the pattern so completely that you beat it. You can quit now. Walk away. The toll won't follow you because you paid in full tonight. 3 hours of absolute adherence, perfect understanding, no fear strong enough to make you break. That's a price the place respects. I look back at the stop-and-go tuck shop, at that squat concrete building with its flickering sign. I thought about Edgar fading away, about the children lost in time, about all the shadows in aisle 3 who used to be people like me. What happens to them if nobody works the night shift? Ray's expression darkened. I don't know. Maybe they fade. Maybe they escape. Maybe they spread beyond this building. That's why there's always someone working here. That's why I've stayed for 37 years. Containment. I took a deep breath, feeling the clean morning air fill my lungs. I'd won. I could leave. I could go back to my normal life and never think about this place again. But I'd also learned something tonight. I'd learned that the pattern could be understood, that the rules could be mastered, that there was a way to exist in this place without being consumed by it. I'll work one more week, I said, and during that week, I'll document everything. I'll create a complete guide to the pattern, a map that shows not just the rules but why they work. Something that will help whoever comes after me survive and eventually escape like I did. Ray studied me for a long moment. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish. Maybe both, I admitted. I worked 6 more nights at the stop-and-go tuck shop. Each night, I took extensive notes, analyzing every occurrence, every pattern, every exception. I wrote a guide that was part rulebook, part psychological preparation, part mystical map. I documented the time layers, the shadow transformations, the toll system, everything. On my 14th and final night, I left the completed guide in the notebook, along with a note. To whoever reads this, you can survive. You can escape. Follow the rules perfectly. Understand the pattern completely. And when the final test comes, wait. No matter how long it takes, wait. The sun always rises eventually. Stay human. Stay strong. And remember, this place feeds on fear and confusion. Deny it both, and you'll find your way out. I handed Ray my keys for the last time as dawn broke on my 15th day. The guide is there for whoever comes next, I said. Ray nodded slowly. You did something I never could. You beat it, and you documented how. Maybe that'll help. Maybe it won't. But you tried. I drove away from the stop-and-go tuck shop as the sun climbed higher in the Texas sky. In my rearview mirror, I watched the building shrink in the distance until it was just a speck on the horizon, then nothing at all. 3 weeks later, I got a text from an unknown number. Started night shift at shop. Found a guide. Already saved my life twice. Thank you. Hey, I smiled and deleted the message. Someone else would survive. Someone else would learn a pattern. And maybe, eventually, enough people would understand the place that its power would fade completely. Or maybe it would exist forever. That pocket of wrong time on a lonely Texas highway, testing each new worker, claiming some and releasing others, accumulating layers of trapped moments like rings in an ancient tree. Either way, I was free. I'd work night shift at a haunted Texas tuck shop. I'd face the shadows and the whispers and the impossible spaces. I'd learned the bizarre rules and understood their true purpose. And I'd survive to tell the story. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving down a dark highway, I see a green, flickering sign in the distance. And just for a moment, I wonder if I really escape at all, or if I'm just in another layer of the pattern, living in a moment that will accumulate and repeat forever. Then I see the sunrise ahead, and I keep driving toward the light, always toward the light.